Hello, it's the Ohio RAM Show coming to you again, and what we are doing here is creating a little bit of a header at the beginning of our interview with Lon Haldeman. After we recorded the show with Lon, he sent me a group of photos from the years prior to the race across America and the first year of the race across America, some other photos. They're really a great history, and I know you'll enjoy them. So when you see the credits at the end of the show, don't go away because we're going to run those photos, a little slideshow at the very end. Some great history here, and we want to thank Lon again for being our guest on the show. It was deeply appreciated.
Well, that voice you might have just heard at the beginning of this Ohio RAM show was that of Lon Haldeman, which we have on the show here this evening, and delighted to have him. But this is the Ohio RAM show coming to you from Southwest Ohio. We are sponsored by the first two time stations for the race across America in Ohio, the ones at Oxford and Blanchester. And I can now announce that there are time stations 41 and 42. I always hold off on those numbers until we see what the next year's race is going to bring, because sometimes a time station change to the west makes our numbers change. But we will be in 2015 time stations 41 and 42. And we are there 24 hours a day with 24-hour food and 24-hour fuel and, most important, 24-hour fans. So it's a great place to come and see the race if you'd like to see it. A little later on, we'll be talking a little more specific about when is a good time to come by and see the race. But just for the record, the dates are now available. The 2015 race start is the 16th of June for the solo RAM riders, and the RAAM, which is the race across the West, which doesn't get this far, so that isn't quite so much interest for us here in Ohio, although we do follow that race pretty closely. And the team start is on the 20th of June, which means here in Ohio we would expect the riders through between Monday, June the 22nd, Saturday, June the 27th, as you see there. If they come through on Monday, Christoph Strasser was way ahead. He was like 36 hours ahead of everybody else, so that was kind of a early event. Whether that'll happen again this year, we don't know. But the bulk of the race gets through here about late Wednesday evening and through Thursday and Friday, when the teams are catching up with the solo riders, which makes Ohio just an excellent place to see the race, because the teams are interfacing with the solo riders about through this particular area, so that makes it quite interesting. And we want to say that we'd be glad to have you, and for those of you who are racers or crews, media people, whoever, we'll be there to help you along the way. With that, I'm going to get on with our very special guest that I'm glad to have with us tonight, a name that's not that is known well in the RAM circles and in racing circles, and that's Lon Haldeman up there in Wisconsin. How are you this evening, Lon?
Good, good. I'm glad to be with you.
Well, I'm sure glad you took time to be with us, and this was kind of spur of the moment this evening, and we just found we had a time and we'd get you on here. Now, for those of you who, could there be anybody watching the show who doesn't know who Lon Haldeman is? We better tell him. Lon, just give us a real quick rundown. You were in the very first RAM, which was at that time called the Great American Bicycle Race, 1982. And tell me a little about that and some of your other events and records.
Well, like you say, the first race across America was actually called the Great American Bike Race. It was had 4 riders, all by invitation, because there were no really qualifications at that time except for trying to get the most well-known endurance athletes together. And John Marino had set transcontinental records in 1978 and 79 and 80 and was a transcontinental record holder. John Howard had won the Ironman triathlon, so he was a household name. Michael Shermer had set a record from Seattle to San Diego, and then in 1981, I set a double transcontinental record from New York to Los Angeles, back to New York, and on my return trip, I broke John Marino's transcontinental record. So I was basically invited to participate in the race because I had broken John's Marino's record. So that's why the four of us were invited basically to be in that first race. So cycling really wasn't like it is today, where you got every weekend there's 200-mile events and brevets and all kinds of stuff. Back then it was you had to really look to find a 200-mile race somewhere, the Davis Double Century or something like that. So anyway, I was invited to participate in the first Great American Bike Race, and ironically, just a few weeks ago, I did a program for the McHenry County, Illinois cyclists, and we actually looked at that first Great American Bike Race Wide World of Sports program, which was a 90-minute show, and we watched it in its entirety, and it really brought back a lot of memories for us about how difficult that race was for me, but then also how much of a following it had across the country. I mean, this is on Wide World of Sports on I believe it was a February Sunday afternoon, and that's when there was only 3 or 4 television stations at the time, so it had a tremendous following across the country. And so there's a lot of people that started watching that race on television who really didn't know anything about cycling, and that race really put cycling on the map as far as public identity. And so that's was my first race, besides the double transcontinental in '81. And then over the next 10 years, I went on to do 14 more races across the country. Some of those were tandem record attempts with my wife Susan and Pete Pensears, who's won RAAM a few times, and then of course participating in RAAM. So there were some years I was doing 2 races a year across the country. So it was a real busy 10-year stretch for me.
Yeah, and you mentioned your wife Susan. I would love to have her here, but tell me a little bit about how you two got hooked up together, and B, a little bit about her own record.
Well, Susan and I probably almost met in passing in 1980 during a bicycle ride race across Missouri and back, a 540-mile event. And I was the first man finisher, and Susan was the first woman finisher, although she was basically the last person to finish. I think there was 17 finishers out of about 35 starters that year. And so I had contacted Susan, the old-fashioned way by writing a letter, and we basically corresponded. She then came on my crew the next year for the double transcontinental, and she got interested in trying to set a women's transcontinental record. So in 1982, before the Great American Bike Race, which was in August 4th, I think hers started like on around June 10th. She took off from Los Angeles and set a women's transcontinental record of 11 days, 16 hours. And kind of a story about that ride, which not everybody knows, is back in those days, it was considered abnormal to ride at night. So she'd ride during the day, and then at maybe 9 o'clock at night, sundown, whatever, go to bed, sleep till the next morning, sunrise, get up and ride another 250 miles, and then go to bed again. Well, that's what she did across the country, but even at that pace, she was almost beating my transcontinental record that I had set the year before of 10 days, 23 hours. Well, she ran into a few problems and stuff with some weather and things, but towards the end of the race, from probably around Athens, Ohio on, she decided just to ride nonstop to New York City, which I think is around 600 miles.
Yeah.
And she rode that last 600 miles totally nonstop in around 36 almost 38 hours, I believe. And by watching her do that, I knew that it was possible to go that long without taking a sleep break every 250 miles. So 6 weeks later, during the Great American Bike Race, all of the four of us guys are getting ready to race, and Wide World of Sports is saying, okay, you guys are going to ride, across California 250 miles, take a sleep break, then you're going to ride, get up the next morning, ride another 250 miles, take a sleep break. So they had this schedule all planned out for the filming. And so what I did is, and just by chance, I said, well, if Susan could ride 600 miles nonstop at the end of a transcontinental, I should be able to do that at the start. And so I took off that first day, across the desert, rode through the first night, rode into the second day, tried to take a sleep break in Prescott, Arizona, around 400 miles, but it was more like just off the bike, changing clothes, didn't really get any sleep. And then I continued to ride until about Joseph City, Arizona, which is around 600 miles, before I really took my first sleep break into that second night. And the only reason I really stopped is because there was a rainstorm blowing in and it turned into headwinds and stuff. And so I went to sleep probably from about 2 in the morning until about 5 in the morning. Well, it turned out that totally changed the race, because by the time I woke up, the other riders had stopped for the night and I had close to a 6 or 7 hour lead. And ABC Wide World of Sports was like, oh, well, this is very unique. Why did somebody ride through the night? And it turned out that was the first time that had really been done in a transcontinental record attempt, and of course the race. So that kind of set a new precedent, I guess, of how people approach the race. And nowadays in Race Across America, that's common. That's everybody expects to do that. Riding the first day and a half or the first night anyway before taking a sleep break. But anyway, that's just something about Susan's record attempt. And Susan went on then the next year, 1983. We were married in June of 83, and 10 days later we took off on a tandem transcontinental record, and we went from Santa Monica to New York City in 10 days, 20 hours, which at that time set the all-time tandem record across the country. And at that time, there really wasn't, well, there was kind of the start of a women's division in RAAM, although it was still in its infancy. So Susan didn't race in the Race Across America that year, but I did. But Susan then continued. I think she raced in the next 7. She did 7 transcontinental records. And her fastest time was 1989. She did 9 days, 9 hours. Which I think it still stands for the fastest northern transcontinental record, where riders actually have to go through hilly Ohio and on into New York City. So anyway, she's had a very productive cycling career also, doing a transcontinental record almost every year during the 1980s.
Well, I had the privilege of seeing Susan, and actually my wife and I followed her just a little bit on our tandem when she came through Ohio at 89. That was such a delight. As you may or may not know, by default, the show has sort of taken on the agenda of trying to encourage women in ultra cycling, endurance racing. And so that was where I saw something that always fascinated me. The men, Lon, looked awful. They looked awful. But when Susan came through, she was smiling and engaged and having just the greatest time ever. I thought, there's something different about the women. They brought something new to it. So that was such a delight. I was at the time station here in Inglewood, which is just a couple miles from me. But I think the very next year, if I recall, they moved the route south for a number of years.
Yeah, went to Savannah pretty much all through the 1990s. Yeah, it would finish in Savannah. And actually I think it was 1990, because in 87 and 88, I think it went to like Washington, D.C. So yeah, in 1989 it went back to New York, and then in the 90s it started going to Savannah.
And I was going to ask you if the story I'd heard about Susan coming up with the idea of riding all night long and you picking up on that idea were true or not, but you've already confirmed that for me.
Well, yes, and I'm not sure if it's that much of an intentional idea Susan had. It's just that that's the way it worked out. I mean, you know, at the end of the race, she got into this attitude that, you know, she wasn't feeling that good. Of course, she's basically exhausted, and she decided she's just going to, you know, to keep on racing all night long. So that's what she did over the, you know, the last 600 miles. Which had I not seen her do that, I would have thought, well, maybe that really wasn't a good idea for me to try that at the beginning of the race. And so it turns out, yeah, it was possible, and it kind of changed how people approach the race every year after that.
Well, I thought I'd read somewhere, and you can confirm or deny this, that when she got to Athens, she realized that unless she did something spectacular, she was not. Did she set the record that year? That she would not set the record?
Well, the women's record theoretically had been set about a month earlier by a woman from Austin named Ann Kovich, and I think she did it in around 14 days. And when Susan and I were both kicking this idea around way back the previous year, we were like, oh yeah, you can do a 15-day transcontinental record. That'll be 200 miles a day. That's pretty good. Well, one thing led to another. Ann Kovich, you know, sets a record, and then Susan starts on her record attempt and was on pace for my 10-day, 23-hour record, because we pretty much knew where I was every night, and she was within hours of being exactly where I was. And then it wasn't until somewhere around the Mississippi River she lost some time, but so it was. She wasn't sure if she's going to break, you know, 10 days, 23 hours or not, but then she picked up the pace again at the end, and I believe her time from Athens, Ohio in was probably faster than what I had done the previous year. So she did set really the, you know, she had a record to break, to beat in the 14-day range, but she was well ahead of that pace, and I guess the carrot in front of her was the men's transcontinental record that I had set the previous year, so that's what she was kind of pacing herself to do.
Okay, well, that's kind of good to know. Well, you've been around RAAM other than a racer for a while. You were actually operated the race or owned it for a time, didn't you, Lon?
Well, yeah, the original riders, Moreno and Shermer and myself and a fellow named Bob Huswood, actually owned the race for 20-some years. And Susan and I were race directors from 2000 to 2003, I believe it was. So yeah, we've seen all sides of it and of course we've officiated and helped out and run time stations and did other stuff too over the years. So we've been involved quite a bit.
Let's see here. I found this picture that I took of you and your daughter Rebecca in 2006. I think you were officiating that year, weren't you, Lon?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. And Rebecca was on the journalist crew, so she was writing articles for the website at that time.
And that was at when the time station at Troy, Ohio, when the route went north of Dayton. It's since been moved to the alignment we have now, going through Oxford and Blanchester, between Dayton and Cincinnati. And there's where I'd been involved with the time stations before, but it came back to Ohio, and this was only about 12 miles from where I live. And I don't mean to speak ill of either Blanchester or Oxford, but those of you, Walt Smith and Martin Dressman and a few other people out there that worked at those time stations, Matt Bond, that was the perfect location, Lon. They gave us rooms in the hotel. We had food. We had everything you could want right there within a stone's throw of us. That was a great spot. And and please don't, you people in Oxford or Blanchester, don't take offense at that. That's just pleasant memories about that particular location. Well, Lon, before I want to talk a little about what you're doing now, but before we get into that, do you have any reflections on endurance racing, ultracycling, where it's going, the race across America, anything about it that you've been thinking about you'd like to share with us?
Well, I mean, the good thing is the race has been around for, what, going on 30, 33 years or so now, at least.
34, I think, coming up.
34 coming up, yeah, this year. And so that's a really good track record, because I know in those first years, we didn't even know if it was going to happen the next year. As a rider, we were trying to get sponsorships and, train and stuff, and we didn't know if there was going to be a race the following year, usually until like February or March. So, on one hand, you're trying to get sponsors, which you needed to do the previous October, November, but on the other hand, you're like getting in this training, and then you don't even know the race is going to happen, because Wide World of Sports didn't want to commit to a contract until it was on television, which usually didn't happen until the following spring. So from that standpoint, it was difficult being a racer. And nowadays, crews are planning 2 years in advance for doing the race and whatever. But back in the day, we didn't even know if things were going to happen, and so that was always a little tough. Trying to get the sponsorship lined up and your training, because you don't want to go out and be training 1,000 miles a week if you don't even know there's going to be a race, or when the race dates would be. ABC was determining a lot of that, and they were bouncing those race dates around based on other film schedules and other events and other things like that. So that was always a little more difficult. And I guess the other thing about those early years that I've appreciated more as things went on is, the pioneering experimentation that we were doing then, not just with trying to ride all night, sleep and whatever, but the diet, the equipment, the evolution of things that have happened over the years, and a lot of that was happening during those early years. As far as we were making our own aero bars out of pieces of PVC pipe and bolting things onto the handlebars, trying to say, well, I wonder if this, using aero bars, I wonder if that would help. Pete Pensears, was playing around in his basement with a lot of that kind of stuff. Even with the diets, we were drinking Carnation instant breakfast liquid diets, trying to come up with diets that would work. And even shoes and trying to get, clipless pedals. There was those first, oh boy, I don't know how many years. It wasn't until like 1987 that I even had clipless pedals to use. So, a lot of those things today that are, taken for granted, we were really experimenting around to see if how well they would work. And so that's why, you look at some of those times of those races back then and go, oh, gee, why were those guys so slow and whatever. But, I mean, a lot of it was experimentation. And some of those, like the 1982 race in particular, I look back on that. That's still the most brutal race I was ever in. I was so hammered at the end of that. I was exhausted halfway through, and plus you didn't know where anybody was in the race, so I raced the whole thing thinking I didn't know if a 6-hour lead was good or a 10-hour lead was good. I had no idea. Where nowadays, everybody gets a little upset with the RAAM website if they don't have instant feedback every 10 minutes. But back then we barely had we didn't have really any good information because we didn't even have time stations. So you didn't even know exactly when people went through, except for an official who was driving from the front of the pack to the back of the pack, back to the front of the pack. And as the spread got larger and larger between first and last, we barely saw an official once a day with a race report. And by that time, most of the information was 18 hours old. So if you said, boy, you had a 200-mile lead, it's like, boy, is it really 200 miles, or is it 150, or is it 250? So, we'd go down for a sleep break in the early morning hours, and we'd have to post a guard, in a car 50 miles back, just to make sure that if anybody got within 50 miles, then I'd wake up and start riding again. And so from that standpoint, things were always stressful. So, and the other thing about the RAAM route book, I mean, if people are using the RAAM route book today, they got GPS, the route book, I don't know how many pages it is. It's probably, it's got to be 100 pages long. Many details, every mini mart, every traffic light, every street turn and everything. Back in the first RAAM route book was 3 typed pages long, and it basically said, like, get on Interstate 10, go across, and it had the towns listed. There might be, go through Flagstaff, Albuquerque, get off at Tucumcari, New Mexico at the 1,000-mile mark, get on Route 54, go to Wichita at 1,400 miles, stay on all the way until you get to central Missouri at 1,900 miles, then you get off and take another turn. So, you basically had a magic marker highlighter pen traced on a AAA map, and that was the route. So when you went into Terre Haute, Indiana, with all those turns, or you went cross town, we went through Indianapolis and we went through other places like that, you didn't know what you were doing. You said, we're supposed to follow Route 40 or Route 36 or whatever it was. And we would have the crew going up ahead, maybe 10 miles ahead, trying to mark corners. But you didn't have cell phones, so the crew couldn't report back where the turn actually was. So you only had CBs, which only worked for line of sight in a city. So we were winging it all the time on trying to find routes and things across town. And of course, when things, when it got foggy and you couldn't see well and various other things. So he was like, boy, I hope I'm on the right route. I haven't seen a road sign here for 10 miles. And you're like, well, the magic marker on the map says we're supposed to be going towards this town, so let's just hope that this road goes to that town. So also from that standpoint, it was, those early races were always stressful. But at the time, you didn't really know it, that, things were as crude as they were. But I'm just comparing that to nowadays. And, even when we were race directors in the early 2000s, GPS was just becoming available on the market. But we went out and actually painted the RAAM route. We had arrows on the road all across the country. So I had riders tell me, the crew put the route book away, weren't even looking at it because they were just following the arrows. Well, nowadays, with the GPS, I believe a lot of crews are watching their laptop with their GPS connection, and the GPS is talking to them, you've got to turn in, 200 feet or 500 feet or 5 miles, whatever. That would have been great to have back in 1981, because we did a lot of advanced exploring just to find out the routes. And that's one of the reasons why Susan and I would go out by bicycle and car and basically ride every route the month before we did the race, because we just needed to scout it. And in hindsight, that gave us a lot of confidence, because I knew the route more or less by the back of my hand, and I would be able to tell the crew, we're going through Terre Haute, this is where the turn is, it's by the Shell gas, it's up ahead, whatever. But so I knew the route a lot better than the crew did, and it was mainly the crew driving the motor home, and the extra vehicles are the ones that got lost because they were trying to wing it, just following the route book or the map or something through town. So anyway, looking back on it, I guess the equipment, the diet, and the mapping and the communication are probably the biggest things that have changed so much in the race over the last 20 years, from what those races were during the first 10 years.
Yeah, well, I recall, I think it was last year, somebody was grumbling because somebody's GPS had gone dark for a few minutes, and I said, when I started this, the only thing we knew was rumors, and they were always wrong. Yep. And we'd find out by reading one of the bike magazines a few months later what happened. But you mentioned your 1982, the very first race, and if if some of our viewers would like to see that video of that, if you'll go to John Foot's ultraracenews.com, on the right-hand side, right above where the playlist is for the Ohio Ram Show. Thank you, John, for supporting the show in that way. But right above that, you'll see a playlist for those videos for the 1982 Great American Bicycle Race, which Lon won, and he's been talking about that. So you can find them right there, and while you're there, give a little boost to John. He does such a remarkable job. There's all kinds of information about ultra cycling there, and turns out John only lives a few miles from me. He was in Troy, Ohio, and which is just a skip up the road from where I live. So there's where you can find those films. Go look at them if you've never seen them. They are remarkable indeed, Lon.
Yeah, and actually that 1982 is available on YouTube, in a 10-part series. Somebody uploaded it, which was really interesting. I think that's the only one that's on YouTube. But,
well, I think that's the playlist, is the YouTube playlist that he has on his site, but it makes it really easy, handy to find, because he's got them all. You just start watching, and you can watch until the cows come home there. Lon, you and Susan have been about some other things, and I do want to take a few minutes to talk about that. Your pack tours. Tell me what your mission is there and what you're trying to accomplish.
Well, Pack Tours, Pacific Atlantic Cycling Tours, and we've started that, back in the early 1980s when we weren't racing across the country. We had a bunch of friends to get together, and we said, let's ride 150, 200 miles a day. We'll stay at Holiday Inns every night, get in a double century during the day, and get a good night's sleep. So basically, it was like RAAM with a sleep break. And those tours eventually evolved into a lot of different routes: Mexico to Canada, Florida to Maine, Route 66 tours, historic tours, all kinds of northern transcontinental tours, central tours, southern routes. So we've crissed across the country all different ways. Probably we've done almost 75 different cross-country tours now. And some of the riders have been with us now. We've been in business well over 30 years, and some of those riders have ridden across the country almost 10 times with us. So they've really done a lot of miles with us. And then we've also started out regional tours. We do our trips in Arizona, which are 1 week long tours. There's some, call it a training camp, but some of them are just recreational tours. We go to historic hotels and things. Other ones are a little more serious, where we're based out of one hotel and ride 100 miles a day for a week at a time. And so we do those. We do trips in Vermont, regional tours. We do trips in Wisconsin. We do ones in the Pacific Crest Trail, in Oregon State and Washington State. So we do these other regional tours also, and they're usually 2-week type trips. So those have been popular also. And then it's even expanded internationally. We've done trips in Africa. We do trips in France. We do trips in Peru. And those are more adventure travel type tours, but there's a certain type of rider that really wants to go out and explore some new areas. So for us, when we first started doing this back in the mid 80s, we thought, we'll just do it for one summer and that'll be it. But every year it's actually got more organized, and it's actually got more established, and we've actually expanded our schedule a little bit. So now we're on the road almost 200 days a year with these tours. So it's turned into pretty much a full-time thing for us now.
Well, and of course that makes it even more thankful on my part that you took time out, because I kind of caught you between things, and I know you're going to be off again next week, as I understand.
Yeah, I just got back from Peru 2 days ago, and in another 2 days I'm heading off to Arizona to start the camps and tours down in Arizona, and I'll be on the road there for another 7 weeks or so. So yeah, it's this is getting to be our busy time of year, and we come back from Arizona, and then in early May through the month of May, we have an 18-day tour, which is our elite tour, which is actually a qualifier for the Race Across America. So anybody who rides 100% of that tour can qualify for RAAM. And the riders who have done that tour said it's the perfect training ride to know if you're ready to do solo RAAM, because it's basically riding at a RAAM pace during daylight hours, and then you sleep at night. And it's a really hard tour, but for the riders that want to do solo RAAM, it's the perfect physically and mentally way to help you understand just how big this country is and how difficult solo RAAM can be. So that's our elite tour, and that's in May. And then during June, we have some other things going on. Of course, RAAM's going on. Maybe we'll be able to be involved with that some way. We put a kids tour on for burn kid teenagers. That we do that across Wisconsin in mid-June. And then in late July, we head out for the Pacific Crest Tour in Oregon, and then that goes for 2 weeks, and then we head down to San Diego to start our Southern Transcontinental Tour, again across the country, and that's a 27-day, basically like the Elite Tour, but it's an easier pace. It's a little over 100 miles a day, and so we have a lot of riders that want to ride across the country, but over 100 miles a day isn't an easy tour, but a lot of people that are involved in ultramarathon cycling, it's a perfect distance for them. So, we got a pretty busy schedule coming on over the next 6 months.
And you said something there that I've mentioned time to time. I says, people who have ridden coast to coast know something that a lot of people don't know, and that is how big this country is.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, and that's what's interesting about those tours. I mean, every day you wake up, especially on the Elite Tour, you're almost in a different weather condition every day. So if you get headwinds one day, you're going to go down the road 200 miles, and it's going to be a different weather system, and you've got different terrain and various other things. So it's constantly changing. No 2 days are the same in a row, and so it's even though the Elite Tour people don't have a whole lot of time for taking photos and sightseeing, they're seeing the country unfold before them in a way most people never imagine.
Lon, I believe you've also had some humanitarian and charitable interest in all of this, haven't you?
Well, yeah, and that's been a total secondary reason. I mean, it never started off as that, but then it turned into such a powerful thing that we started running these tours, especially in Peru, where we would do these rides back 300 miles into the jungle, and we'd go to some orphanage that we were like the first white people to visit there. And they say, how did you find us? And we're like, well, we're just riding our bikes in the jungle, and we find you guys. And so we started bringing supplies, into these orphanages, that nobody really was supporting. And then there were a place the same way that needed schools built. So we actually would go in and help build schools with the help of the village. And then we would go down these trips on the Amazon on the river boats, and we would bring books and things to all these villages. And there again, they'd say, how did you find us here? Nobody ever stops to see them. And so over the years, we've been there. I've been there almost 15, 16 trips now to Peru, and probably 12 of them have been strictly humanitarian type things, along with some cycling. And then also we've done a lot of other cycling tours there in some just extreme areas. Peru is such an interesting country. You can ride across there and go from sea level to 15,000 feet within a period of about 70 miles. So the terrain and everything is so varied. It's really a neat place to go. And so that's one of the reasons we've gone back there so many times, because I just came back from a region of Peru that I did a bus tour in that I've never been able to get to in the past. And so there's even been there 16 times. There's still parts of that country that I don't know, and I'm fascinated to go back there every time and find new areas.
Well, Lon, I thank you for being here with us, and if you're watching the show on the OhioRAAMShow.com website, I'll put right below in the show notes a link to your pack tours, Lon, so people can contact you there if any of this interests them. And I do appreciate you taking the time to be with me. I didn't say at the beginning, but I am Lee Kreider, the host of the show, and this is going to be show number 81 in the Senate. By that time, we will have hit our 3rd anniversary at doing this, and we thank always Google for making this available to us at no cost whatsoever, and we do appreciate that. And before we go, Lon, is there anything we've missed, anything you'd like to get on that we haven't talked about and tell people about?
Well, I guess for your Ohio volunteers that are helping out with those time stations, I mean that's a great thing that they're doing, to be able to come out there for 2 days or a week or how much time they're at the at the time station. That really helps out the race a lot, and I know the riders really appreciate it. Even back in the days when we had the very first time stations, as a rider, counting down how far is it the next time station, just because you wanted to have that interaction of somebody cheering for you as you went by in the middle of the night. So I say that's a great thing that you've organized, and that the people of Ohio are supporting RAAM the way that they do. It really helps out the race, and the riders really appreciate it.
Well, I always hesitate to use the word, Lon, but if there is a legend, I think you qualify for that. I don't know who else would qualify for that in the annals of endurance cycling. So we do appreciate you being on the show, and we wish you and Susan all the best. Please say hello to her. And we didn't say this, but Susan goes under the name of Susan Nortelangelo and Lon Haldeman. But you'll see all that at the website address. Now, if you're watching this show on YouTube, or you're watching it on one of the other sites that embed the show, and we do appreciate the sites that do that, to get that link, you will have to go to OhioRAAMshow.com. This came up so quick that I wasn't able to prepare a slide that had the website on it, but you can find it there. And we do appreciate all your support that you give. We have so many great supporters out there. And if you see the show or a link to the show on Facebook, give us a like there or a share. That always helps. On Google Plus, you give it a little plus sign there or a share. And you'll see it also mentioned on Twitter under the hashtag RAAM 2015. It'll be now, hashtag RAAM 2015. Sure, it boosts the viewership of the show, but it boosts ultra cycling and the whole sport of cycling altogether, which seems to be showing a lot of interest and growth here of late. We appreciate all of that. Lon, thank you again for being with us.
Okay, great. Thanks for asking me.
Thank you for taking the time out. We certainly appreciate that. And with that, we're going to say goodbye for now, everyone.
the cloud.